actually, now is the time for our first speaker. He has more than 25 years of experience as cultural director, producer, cultural political developer, and VD for cultural institutions. Please give a warm applause for Nils Rikholt.
Thank you for inviting me, Jonas. Thank you for coming, all of you. I think, can you hear me? It's good? It's fine? Good. I think community theatre has all the ingredients needed to become a tool for change. But when I was invited to come and talk to you on that specific topic, there are so many entrances. It's like a prison. There's so many different aspects to the question, how? Because at the very same time, community theatre, community cultural institutions, community-based cultural institutions are still at the side of mainstream. They're kind of accepted, but they're not invited into the mainstream structures. We haven't developed mainstream supportive structures in terms of economy. We haven't made sure that we recruit participants, the people in the same kind of professional standards that we would normally do in other kinds of, or other parts of society. So when I sat down and started working on the presentation, I kind of, how should I actually address this? What's actually needed? And I think that from my background as a cultural political advisor, as a researcher, as a former museum director, as a producer, as a musician way back, I got the kids and I had to choose, and I choose academia instead of an artist. Living life as an artist, simply not money enough in that. I've kind of had the privilege of touching upon all aspects. I've also had the privilege of working in Oslo, of living in Stockholm, working a lot here in Malmö, and living and working in Copenhagen. So I have, without having a very profound and deep understanding of each of the three Scandinavian countries, I kind of understand the differences. I kind of see the same, but not exactly. So I thought it might be relevant for you to start reflecting on community in terms of who do we do it for? Is a community theatre made for us, the people engaged in it, because it's simply just funny and nice, and it makes us feel alive, and it makes sense to our personal aspirations and hopes, and it gives a meaning when we wake up in the morning? Or is it even bigger than that? Has this to do with really engaging with people? And by engaging with people, engaging in terms of becoming or being interested, curious, listening, to be infected. Because that's what happens when you meet people, you get a cold. Or you fall in love. Something happens the very moment you actually start to reach out for other people, people you do not know, that you might want to build a relationship to, something happens. And that might be something surprising, something that you could not govern or control or with. My good friend and colleague at the Goldsmiths University, Gerald Liston, once said, the very cornerstone of a good arts environment is an engaged audience. Those are the people we're doing it for. Those are the people Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare, Ibsen, actually wanted to relate to. Not just the people that looked like them, or behaved like them, but the people. This unpredictable crowd out there that we know so very little about, but always talk about in so many different terms. The Söder Community Theatre is in many ways, it even says so here on the banner, is in many ways an institution that sets out to do exactly that, to reach out to people and engage them. Finding ways of engagement without controlling that engagement, without being the ones defining it. It's not Jonas or Mikael who says, oh, but engagement with you would be very nice, but it's on my terms. It's on neutral terms. It's a collaborative project. And by doing so, they distribute power. So one of the things I will be touching on in my presentation is very much on power. Communities. Well, there's so many of them. They're the communities of interest. The ones that make people every Sunday in this city dress up in blue, light blue, and go to the soccer stadium. Or the people who meet at the Skånes Dance Theatre. Or the people who meet at the Söder Community Theatre. Or those who just meet to make food together. Or those who meet to bring the kids safely from point A to point B together. And have different kind of interaction with each other. And those who connect because they found out that they actually like each other through the parental meetings at the class or wherever. There's so many different levels in sports, in culture, in social life, where we meet out of interest. We have a very specific interest. Those communities are digital, they are analog, they're physical, and they're there, and they're all the time. Then there are the communities of belief. For those who go to the synagogue, or the mosque, the church, or to the Social Democrats' annual meeting in Gothenburg, or wherever that is, it's about beliefs, it's about religious beliefs, it's a community of political beliefs, it's a community of social beliefs. And these people also define themselves as belonging to something. Communities are very much about belonging. Now the communities of needs. Many newcomers to the Scandinavian countries form simply communities out of needs. You're a refugee too. How do I get in contact with this person? Or how can I actually get that extra money? Or who should I approach in order to, all these things. How do I navigate in this new country? That creates communities of needs. And then when we have found out all the formal things, we find out we're still left outside. Then the community changes, but it's still a community of very basic needs. How to interact, how to become a citizen, for instance. The community is by habit. You're born into something. I remember from when I grew up, there was these strong political discussions every time my mother's family came to dinner. Because my father was a conservative, and they kind of liked him, because then they could come to dinner and punch him every time. Because they were social democrats. But when confronted, why are you social democrats? Why? We are. Our granddad was a social democratic mayor. We are social democrats. Uncle M, you're a socialist. Uncle F, you're not a social democrat, you're either. You're really conservative, but you don't want to get out of the closet. But habit meant so much because their community, where they came from, where they still lived, had this very strong working class, we are all social democrats. Sometimes we also engage in communities by choice, because we're curious. We want to find out. We get curious on people for different reasons, and we choose to become a member of that specific community. We are the extraterrestrials that are approaching that community. Or we simply just become part of it by chance. Somebody said that you had to go to meet Söder Community because there was this theatre, and then suddenly your own life story becomes a play. You didn't see that happening.
Sorry, Hadi.
Sorry, Hadi. So communities have all kinds of different aspects connected. And that, when we're talking about theatre, we have to have that understanding, that complexity of communities. We have to understand that there are so many drivers of being part of a community. That even though we're here in a good family room, a safe room for unsafe ideas, and some of you have been here for 3 days. Now it's the extended family who's here, and we might think likewise, but still be quite different, and we might have different reasons for being here. And that multitude of reasons, or that diversity of reasons, is quite important when we're talking about it. For many people, opening their aesthetic practice, because that's very much what community is all about. It's opening up the theatre world or the dance world and including people. It's a matter of politics. It's a matter of actually daring not to do what you're supposed to do. And that too addresses kind of community performative arts being at the side of mainstream, at the side of legislation. That you're constantly actually testing the borders, the lines, the limits for what you can do. And by doing that, you're political. And by reaching out to find new stories and gain new people, you're becoming political. And when you are political, you're always a challenge. You might even be a threat to that mainstream perception of what good art is all about. In the Nordics, one of the great privileges we have had at the center that promotes and works for cultural democracy and participation in Denmark, it's a competence center, which is run by myself and a number of colleagues, has been to map and scan and dive into the Nordic cultural political atmosphere and world and see what's going on. And I will just take you through 8 perspectives that we can see is constantly going on. So sometimes when I speak to people working with the communities, they say, why can't we get it supported? Well, maybe you can in the formal structures, but you're asking the wrong questions. Or you're proposing your suggestions in a way that doesn't fit the political parameters that the cultural politicians and the cultural political architects, meaning the civil servants, are all about. So, I'll just take you through 8 perspectives that does matter when we talk about how cultural politics are being formed. And it's not so that it's either or. Those 8 parameters or criteria, they're constantly out there in the political discourse, cultural political discourse. The first of them is, of course, culture is a national narrative. The theatre, Dramaten, or in this case the Royal Theatre in Copenhagen, or the opera, those institutions that we all have, because it's all about Western excellence, it's about showing who we are, that always gets money, that always gets funded. Because it's about the national self-perception. And we build these institutions, and we fill them with the usual suspects, people looking like me, probably more female than a male, but still, 50 plus, well-educated, middle class, you know. The other one is culture as an identity matrix. In Copenhagen, it's very much about being hipster, funky, on a bike, kind of cool, minimalistic. I love that city map is simply one of the best city maps ever made in Copenhagen history. It's so good on a wall, it's completely useless if you want to find the point A to point B. But it's still kind of representative in terms of our own local Copenhagen identity. All over the Nordics, specifically in Denmark and Sweden and Norway, we have this notion about being very good kids. We do a lot for our kids. We have school programs. Kulturelle skolesekken in Norway is such an important way of distributing at least mainstream national culture out into the country. And the same goes for Denmark. Skoletjenesten. Culture as entertainment, of course. This goes all over the world. Beyonce, been there, done that. Nobody has ever heard about horses until they suddenly flew in. Beyonce and Madonna and Elton John and the hipster elite from Copenhagen always found their way down to horses because we could all meet on that field those days when those concerts did. This is about placing somebody on the map. It has to do with very large, commercially well-functioning setups like mega concerts, etc. Culture is a societal driver. This is where Richard Florida comes in. Oh, but if you're just working with culture, you're so innovative and creative and things just happen and it just flows, and let's put something into that because then we can run society and we can engage people and this is so good. But when it's put into context with the national paradigm, it always looks like that. Because those are the people who actually framed cultural politics for the last 50 years. They're not young anymore. I still try to pretend being young, but I can't escape the simple fact that now there are generations that are actually younger than me, and professionals. But for many years, I claimed to be young. Culture is a democratic clue. The idea that if you just engage in culture, people, migrants, might just love being Norwegian or coming to Norway, coming to Denmark, coming to Sweden. In that case, you fit. You're part of the democratic clue. Community theatres engaging with multi-diversity. In that year, in the Arabic-speaking world, it became a huge financial success for King, which is a local-based Malmö gaming corporation. So sometimes it does actually work as an innovator, and the 12 kids could kind of replace their former life with a life as game developers at King. In this case, the Royal Chapel, Copenhagen, playing Schubert. Take a look at that picture. Something's happening. What's happening there is that the man in black didn't go out on stage and say, turn it off. He went out on stage and said, please turn it on. Turn it on, download this app in case of emotions, and when you hear Schubert and you feel angry, press red. Or if you feel despise, press blue, or whatever. There were 12 different colors and 12 different sentiments. And what happened was that the orchestra that all suffers from tinnitus and only can see the conductor suddenly sensed the change in the light design because that was connected to the app. They were having a conversation with the audience. And that conversation immediately allowed them to say, well, you shouldn't be angry here, so I will play it slightly more soft. They didn't change the tone, but they changed the perception of the play. So sometimes innovation does take place. Culture as a global fixed point, that's the new one. This is the magical Megorium. 2007, local, regional, national, Europe and the world was so far away. 2017, we know everything. Donald Trump can't have a new thought without us knowing it within seconds. So we have become globalists. We orientate globally. We define ourselves globally. And we are completely local. It's all about getting the kids from school or to the kindergarten and finding that liter of milk and navigating and be safe on the bicycle, you know. So we're completely local. The regional and the national levels, those are now the levels that is kind of becoming further away because they're less important. The local, me, my community, my reality, my everyday, and the global are the two things that dominate the way that we see, understand, and perceive ourselves. Culture is the game changer. That little setting. Those of you who are from Malmö will understand that this one is Malmö Live, and that was a game changer. Because it was really expected, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful shoebox concert hall. And it was supposed to be an add-on. But it turned out to be so expensive that it had to program some of the same things that they did at Moiskamp or at KB or at some of the other venues in the city. And now they are finding survival quite difficult. So it became a game changer. Those of you who are from Oslo, you will understand that this one is your coming library. The Temple of Slow Food for the Mind, which is the Dijkmanske Library. The idea that we can kind of reverse time and create a space where philosophy and thoughts and conversation can take place in a different level than we normally do. So these 8 perspectives are the perspectives whenever we are out there. We talk to politicians, we talk to civil servants, we talk to researchers, we talk to arts institutions. We hear that these 8 aspects are constantly influencing the design of cultural life in Norway, in Sweden, in Denmark. So if community theatre should be a game changer, or something that actually can form and process change, you have to understand that this is the framework that you're dealing with. These are the logics that your politicians and your political architects, the top civil servants, are dealing with. This is how they see culture. This is their perception of cultural life. And this is also how 85% of the money is distributed. That's the logic behind the supportive systems, the application systems, the foundations that we have created whether that be in Kulturrådet in Stockholm or in Oslo or Kulturstyrelsen in Copenhagen, it's the same object. Okay? You follow me? So, community-based and oriented cultural initiatives, they must be aware that these complex parameters are actually the ones defining your opportunity to get formal funding. But then there are lots of other ways to do it, actually. Audience is one thing. Because one of the things that the politicians realize is that we have to seek and we don't know what to seek for. We hope that Dumbledore will come with his magic wand and just make everything happen. And we have this disturbed picture of who are they? Who are the Copenhageners, the Malmöids, the Oslo livers? Who are they citizens? What do they look like? How can we engage with them? I already did that. One of the reasons is that we're looking for something that is still anchored in a national paradigm and not in a global one. Another one is that we are talking about delivering things instead of doing things. Instead of me standing on the stage, we might have sit in a circle and we might have been this close to each other, engaging with each other, feeling each other. That would have created a different conference, a difference. Or we might even have done, a walk and talk. But we are so afraid normally to challenge the formats that we are so comfortable with. To me, to come and do a presentation in a traditional format, it's very I know what I do. I've been a professional so long that I won't be a complete embarrassment to myself, but I might actually learn a lot more myself from doing things differently. It's very much about understanding where the audience is. The projects. One of them is was called Odessa, and the other one is being launched almost as I speak. The report is finished, but now the European bureaucrats just need to find out which day we are allowed to give it free. But those two reports have told us two things. One of them is spectating is no longer just spectating. We have all kinds of aspirations from spectating to enhancing the circle when we're talking about performance lives. Very much what theatre is all about, very much what community theatre is all about. And we're talking about collaboration, we're talking about bringing people on stage as the artists, we're talking about finding new narratives, we're engaging with people in different ways. So participatory, collaborative, co-creative, co-curative processes are kind of the new words that we need to understand has to be the formation of our own objects if we want to get funded. Yeah. I want to show you, this is kind of funny, but then I want to show you a case. This is funny because it's the Rijksmuseum. In the museum world, the Rijksmuseum is one of the giants. It's like Dramaten in Stockholm, or Nationalteatern in Oslo. But they released 250,000 artworks digitally. They also opened the museum for all kinds of groups on Mondays when the museums are closed. For instance, in the big hall, they had yoga classes. So you can see the night watch, which you can't see normally because there's too many people. You can actually stand on your head, you can enjoy it, you can get different perspectives on everyone. What happens when you do that is that you learn a lot as an institution, as a professional institution, because you get completely different perspectives to your own professional practice, which is probably the most important learning for arts institutions. So it has taught me that when we go out, and sometimes we do go out and preach, because we believe in it, I think it's an institutional duty to promote a state of affairs where it's possible to test opinions, formats, modes, expressions, connections, people, boundaries and norms with the people that you engage with. Because if you don't do that, you just reproduce a specific modernistic anchored power structure, which is artistically interesting. I'm not completely disqualifying all the wonderful works made in the 20th century, but I think that's not where community art is. This is where you have an opportunity that most mainstream theatres doesn't have, because they don't dare. But this is where you have to be, because if you're not, you wouldn't exist. Now you have an advantage. Once they sat on the stage, as they always do, and the technicians and everybody was there, and we talked, and then at some point somebody said, you know what, we have the hipsters, the good-looking guys, the good-looking broads, that all the other ones will kill to have. But that's the only audience we have. That we're the Copenhagen music theatre. We don't have 80% of the audience. We have the one